What's in your wallet? And more importantly, how much of your money is not in your wallet, but instead sitting in a savings or investment account? And how do you make that money in the first place? Welcome to Deep Dive. I'm James Freeman of the Wall Street Journal. Today we're talking about building and maintaining wealth, and we're fortunate to have with us three people who know the territory. Jeff Sica is the CEO of Circle Squared Alternative Investments. Rebecca Rooney is the Senior Vice President of Private Wealth Management and a financial advisor at UBS. And Veronica Dager is host of the Wall Street Journal podcast Secrets of Wealthy Women, as well as the author of Resilience, How 20 Ambitious Women Used Obstacles to Fuel Their Success. Thanks to all of you for being here. Now, you've promised you're going to share some secrets, Veronica, with men as well as women.
Absolutely.
So we're all able to learn from this.
Opportunity.
Good. Okay. And the title of your book, Resilience, and this is about how you make it in America, I would say, as a general rule, but a lot of interesting lessons about the grit and the hard work that these people showed along the way.
That's right. Grit is a huge part of this. I interviewed 20 women like Maria Sharapova, Sheila Johnson, Bonnie St. John, Barbara Corcoran, and all of them share a common characteristic. They do not give up. No matter what happens in their lives, they keep going. They are determined to be successful in business. They are determined to be financially successful. So even when they hear no, they keep on pushing. And when they hit those setbacks, they get up very quickly.
Okay, it's kind of fun, the different lessons for people who want to check it out. It's available to Wall Street Journal subscribers. It's sort of like a business case study book where you have the sort of short chapters and then a lesson from each successful woman along the way at the end of each chapter. And yeah, I mean, I guess one thing you take away is there's really no substitute for hard work.
Right, exactly. And in this country, that is something that gets you very, very far. So if you're willing to put in the time, you're willing to move the dirt, you're willing to do those jobs that other people may not want to do, you can become very successful, especially as an entrepreneur. The opportunity is vast. So you can make a good amount of money working in corporate America like all of us do right here at this table. But however, if you have your own business, you take on that more risk, your financial rewards can be so much greater because this is your baby. This is something you are building day in and day out. And when you do hit success, that's your success to take with you.
Right. Okay. So along with the hard work, obviously having a useful education matters. We just wanted to show you a graphic, a few of the stats from a Wall Street Journal study in 2015, still pretty relevant, I think. We've been told, everyone's been told, and I think it's largely true, that a college education is very valuable, but it does matter in terms of your future earning what you study in school. So we're looking here, petroleum engineering. This is an undergraduate degree in that field. Person who does that can expect a lifetime median annual salary of $136,000. Very different from early childhood education, just $39,000. Now, this isn't to say we don't want teachers and people shouldn't do what they like, but I would imagine as you advise clients, there is a balance between do what you love, pursue the things you love, and take care of business and take care of the earnings that you need for your family.
Right. And I think that's a very important point. Really the goal here is to think, what can the money do for you? Right. So really identifying early on as you can, what are your goals and objectives in life? You may need the much higher salary to reach your goals and objectives, or for others, you may not need as much. So I think it's important to start off very realistic on what your long-term goals are to help you decide what is the right career path for you in the long term.
And speaking of careers, Veronica was talking about being willing to move the dirt. Jeff, you've made a lot of your money in the dirt.
Yeah. I mean,
that's kind of your business in a way.
Yeah, I love the dirt. I love what you could do with the dirt. But one thing I know is that we're talking about entrepreneurship, and we're talking about how to look at investing, and what Veronica writes about, which I think is great for men and women, because that whole entrepreneurship, for me, it was to look at something that I truly loved, which was real estate, and bring the whole opportunity that investors weren't necessarily getting and they weren't getting the information either. They weren't.
Right.
They were speculating. They were putting their money into risky investments. They had a false opinion about what they could achieve in real estate. So we just try to educate people. That's one of our main functions.
And sorry.
Well, I was going to say, if you are going to take one of those low-paying jobs and you know that in advance you want to be a teacher, you really got to think about things like student debt. Do you want to take on $100,000 of student debt if you're only going to be making $39,000? And if that answer is yes, then that's a choice you're going to have to live with, not just in your 20s, but maybe all the way into your 50s. So if you are going to take one of those low-paying jobs, you need to think about, okay, how am I going to meet my bills? And so maybe that's taking on a side hustle, a side business, becoming an entrepreneur in your free time in order to make your nut.
Right. Now, I'm wondering, when you advise clients, I assume sometimes they come to you and say, my kid wants help getting a graduate degree, maybe even a doctorate degree. Do you kind of leave that up to them, or are there kind of basics for people who are thinking about how much education, what is a good investment in education, saving versus spending on further education?
Right. So we try to advise our clients to be very smart early on when thinking about investing in their children's education. And the earlier you can have those conversations, the better. There's a lot of great vehicles that grow tax-free. So first, let's try to make sure our clients are investing early enough for education. And then when it comes to down the road, though, of course, when their child wants to maybe receive multiple degrees and it costs a lot more than they had forecasted for their children, it's really just trying to think about is that, maintaining the right balance between what their needs are as they're getting older and the needs of their children, because it really has to work together. And we all want to be very supportive of our children and their goals. And sometimes it may mean they do need to take on some student loans, but also making sure your children are educated about the implications of having debt.
Right. Speaking of saving versus going into debt, we have, I think, another graphic about the power of compound interest, which I think a lot of young people don't always understand completely. But this is just a basic graphic that I think shows the value. If you can somehow save $10,000, let's say, in your 20s, early 30s, and leave it alone for 40 years, 6% annual return, where you mentioned a tax deferred vehicle. We're assuming no taxes along the way. 6% is about the long-term real return on stocks in the U.S. So you can see there, over 100 grand if you can allow that power to work. But of course, if you borrow, that power of compound interest is moving in the other direction. Whoever you borrowed from is gaining that. And I don't know, is this a lesson that everyone gets, or you have to start at this kind of a level with your clients?
Right, so this is my favorite topic. I think if viewers take nothing else out of learning how to invest, it's understanding the power of compounding. I'm completely in agreement with you. I think you shouldn't assume that everyone understands how powerful it is. And especially when speaking with younger people, millennials today, they need to see these types of graphics because it's hard to understand. How can $10,000 result in that much money? And I think a big inhibitor of people wanting to invest is they never think they have enough, right? And so it's really trying to educate them, just whatever money you have, start today. The earlier you start, the higher likelihood you are going to have to reaching your goals, the less risks you're going to have to take along the way. And, it's more of a win-win strategy.
And I guess related to this, Jeff, I think people have to realize the difference between assets that create wealth, that would be stocks, bonds, et cetera, and maybe borrowing for assets that don't. That would be clothing, cars, which depreciate in value. Furniture, for example, might be lovely to have, but to borrow for it, these are assets that decline very quickly.
Yeah, and when I look at that compounding, and I have 3 in college now, so at the same time.
I'm sorry.
So it is rough, really rough. But, because I get those bills and I'm thinking, you got to make the most of this because this is not cheap. But the reality of it is they have to discover what they want to do. And I try talking to them about compounding interest. And what occurred to me is that you look at this 6% number as an example. The biggest problem I have with that particular chart is getting people to agree that 6% is okay. And that's a very hard thing to do because what they hear a lot of times are the windfalls. They hear about, in the real estate world, they hear about the guy who happened to own the piece of property that Amazon built a fulfillment center on. They hear about that and they think that that's what they're going to do. But in reality, you find a lot of the very wealthy investors were always willing to hit singles and doubles. And were satisfied with that. And when they got to a later age, they avoided the big pitfalls. And they don't sit around comparing whose portfolio does better than the other person. And I think we have to get, especially the millennials, to a point where they're willing to be satisfied with what would be considered by a lot of people mediocre returns.
I think a lot of the millennials, though, from what I've heard, people, and I'm thinking younger millennials, people in their 20s, not so much the ones in our 30s, but people in their 20s are more risk averse very often because they've seen what their parents went through in 2008, lost their jobs, lost half their portfolios, what have you. So a lot of those folks are sitting in cash, and that's a problem, right? Because if you're, some of the interest rates on cash accounts are better now, 2%, 3%, depending on where you look. But still, that's not going to, less than 6%. Right. And long term, that's going to hurt you. So there's actually a risk in just sitting in cash. Potentially long term, there's a lot less risk in being in the stock market.
Right. I was going to say, maybe this is a little aggressive, but for someone in their 20s or 30s, I would probably say zero cash, all stocks. Maybe that's going a little far, but
no, I mean,
but if it's for long-term
directionally
investment.
Where you're coming from, I can understand. We tend to use this framework at UBS, the 3 L's, liquidity, longevity, and legacy. And so while I do agree, the younger you are, the more market risk you can and really should take to reach your long-term goals. We think it's really important, though, to have a healthy liquidity, short-term cash, not necessarily in cash, because there's an opportunity cost to just being in cash, but cash-like, because the biggest problem people have staying invested in the markets, of course, is the psychological, when we go into a recession or correction. So if you have that right amount of cash-like sitting there, it helps you sustain the market volatility. So we think there's it's important to talk about savings as well as the long-term investment portfolio.
And Veronica mentioned the aftermath of the financial crisis, which originated as a housing crisis. And I think this gets to, we talk about how stocks and bonds are an investment, car, furniture, clothing, not an investment. Housing, unfortunately, I think was believed to be residential housing, your own house, the one you live in, seen as an investment by a lot of people when Jeff, it's probably better seen as consumption. We talk about a long-run real return on stocks of 6% in the U.S. Mike Milken argues for real estate, it's pretty close to zero. And when you count everything that people end up investing in their homes to upgrade them, very hard to get a return on these things, especially for those of us who were blessed to choose New Jersey as a home.
Exactly. I was just thinking that every day we lose money on we lose value in our houses. But that's been one of the most interesting dynamics for me, is how the home was once the ultimate investment, and it is not now. In the Northeast, it has a lot to do with paying what I call property taxes, paying rent to the government to own the houses, where now you have people who put a significant amount of their money in their homes, selling their homes 15, 20 years later for what they paid for it. So not only have single-family homes turned out to be a very, very bad investment, they also cast a very negative light on real estate in general. That is just one aspect of real estate. There's a lot more real estate that people could start looking at any age, because you don't have to be, most people think you have to be ultra wealthy to be in real estate. You really don't. But staying away from single-family homes is probably a smart thing.
You tend to like to own the dirt under commercial properties.
Yes.
And along with particular retail stores, it seems like there's sort of along with the financial trend, there's kind of a millennial thing with wanting to be in apartments close to a train, close to a city, close to amenities versus larger houses that you drive a long way.
Right. We took that demographic shift where millennials now want to live near transit hubs. And in New York City, where millennials can't afford the astronomical rents in New York City, they want to live in New Jersey. They want to live outside of the high rent districts. And the further away you get, the less rent becomes. So we saw that demographic where now if you talk to most millennials, they're not even talking about owning a home as being a goal. So as a company, what we did is we started to really invest in multifamily and apartments. And what it's led to is there's such significant demand for apartments, and the rents have gone up exponentially. Whereas you could live in towns like Jersey City or Hoboken and you'd pay a reasonable amount. Now the rents in the waterfront from New York City are now where New York City rents are. So we've gone down the train line, so to speak, and we've started investing because no one wants to own homes. So you could have a home on the market, and then you have the empty nesters who sell their home and rent an apartment and go live in Florida. So you have all these different cross currents in real estate that make it a very attractive asset.
Yeah, so Rebecca, until the places like the New Jersey have sensible governments and reduce the burden, we're not going to ask for a political comment from you guys, but suffice to say, long term, your own home has not been the greatest investment. What do you look at in terms of basic allocation? If someone says, okay, I'm working hard and I'm saving every month and I'm starting at a young age, which is so important.
Right.
U.S. Stocks mainly, U.S. versus foreign, how much is other stuff? What do you give them as kind of the general guideline?
Right. Well, as you may know, asset allocation is really 80-90% of what drives long-term returns in portfolios. So it's less about the particular manager, the particular strategy, and much more about the big picture. So I love that we start there, and that's really deciding between how much in stocks, how much in bonds, how much in alternative asset classes like real estate and longer, maybe illiquid type of investments. And then within stocks, thinking about the diversification. We like to say in our industry, diversification is really the only free lunch because it really can work towards your advantage. And for a long-term investor, for a young person, you really do need that diversification. That's across geographies, that's across size of company, and across types of company, high growth companies, income-oriented companies, value. So it's a really robust discussion of just trying to set up that framework.
Okay, and I was going to come back to you as far as we've talked about asset allocation. We've talked about working hard, getting well educated, saving, not spending, not going into debt. But now you gotta do something. You gotta make the money. And I want to talk about some of these case studies here. And speaking of getting down in the dirt. Angie from Angies List, amazing success. It's a directory of local services that have been recommended by people in the network, done very well, went public and was later bought. But didn't start out in a very glamorous way for Angie.
Right, Angie, yeah, she's a trooper. So she started out working in a 10-by-10 office with a borrowed phone from her parents. This office had no windows, or just had one window looking at a cinder block wall. Thank you very much.
Keeping costs low, that's good. I like that.
Right, and so she was in her 20s, and she would literally spend 5 to 6 hours a day going door to door around the suburbs of the Midwest, asking people to sign up for her services. And she heard no so many times. Nobody believed in the business at first, but she believed in it, and she kept going. And so she would move the dirt. She would put in the work and just keep out there, keep pitching the business, keep talking to people, and eventually it caught on over time. And so she went from this business where nobody wanted anything to do with it to eventually down the road selling the business for $500 million to Barry Diller's IAC Interactive. And so that just goes to show that you need to believe in your business, and in order to get that huge success, you have to take the risk and you have to put in the work. And sometimes that means doing the paperwork that nobody wants to do, making those sales calls. Like Angie herself was not a salesperson. She hates public speaking, yet she made herself go out and do speeches. She made herself go door to door trying to get new clients because she knew that was the only way the business was going to succeed, and it did succeed.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, a lot of things that are remarkable about that story, but just the idea that she didn't like public speaking, so therefore she will spend all day pitching people.
Right. She counterintuitive.
And this is, I guess, this is part of the advice for people starting out in any business is they're you're going to be doing things that are going to make you uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you want to do anything unethical, but you really do have to push yourself into areas where you might not normally want to go.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. So what I love so much about Veronica's book and Resilience are there's some messages that are quite broad, and especially from my perspective as a financial advisor, right? It's not about avoiding risk, it's about managing risk. And so each of her entrepreneurs had to take their own risk that was very uncomfortable for them at some point, and it's staying the course, right? So just like they had to stay the course with their goals, and it was bumpy along the way, more than they expected, the same for your investment portfolio. I mean, some of these values really do cross sectors, and you can take a lot away from her book.
And Jeff, so before you could buy the dirt, I assume you had to be down in the dirt a lot. Before you were running your own fund, there was probably some period of doing the hard work to get to that point.
Yeah, and like Veronica said, a big thing for me, and the story she profiles so brilliantly in her book, is so many people tell you you can't do it. So many people just line up to tell you this is a bad idea. For me, they said, why, you've been doing this for 20 years, why are you going to change now? And I didn't really have any good answer. I just felt, well, it's time. It's just time. And that's a big thing with entrepreneurs, because I tell most entrepreneurs, when you're out there and you get people coming up to you and trying to discourage you, you have to ignore them. You have to walk away from them, because if you listen to them, you're going to give up. And not, and Veronica points out, not focusing so much on success and failure. When you're an entrepreneur, you wake up every day and you inevitably fail sometimes an unlimited amount of time, and feel like quitting. That's why a book like Veronica's is so great, because the entrepreneurs out there get to open this book and read about these incredible successes and know that, yes, they could fail and succeed, because every story of a successful entrepreneur is, when I speak, the first thing I say is I profile my failures. I get up there and I tell them where I failed in life and business. And when I tried to just talk about my successes, people would kind of doze off. Yeah. And then I started talking about my failures, and all of a sudden people are listening to me. So I keep doing it. So.
I'm not sure what that tells us about human nature, but obviously it does. People can relate to it. I think that was one of my takeaways from the book too. Is so many of the people in there, they're finding sort of tricks to fire themselves up when the whole world is saying no.
Right, you say mantras to yourself, you listen to powerful music. It's like almost getting ready for a really tough workout at the gym. You have these mental tricks, telling yourself you're good enough and you deserve it and you should be at the table. All of those things, they sound hokey, but they actually really work. Having those affirmations, reading over your journal and remembering your past successes and how you prospered even though you faced those obstacles. You came out okay, you're still alive, you're still here, and you're actually doing better than you did 5 years ago. Most people that's the case for, especially in this country.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you another interesting takeaway. Rana Kalyubi, who she is an artificial intelligence genius.
Super smart.
But one challenge for her when she started was she would go into a gathering of tech executives, most of them guys, and she wasn't sure what to talk about, but she eventually figured out how to do this.
Right, because a lot of them knew each other from school or from sports. They'd have like a natural rapport going on. So she realized in order to fit in that maybe she should get up on the sports scores. So she would go on Twitter the night before, read up about the games, or she would look into, what do I know, who do I know in common with this person, this gentleman in the room, so I can find that connection. Because in general, in all those people who are investing in an entrepreneur's business, they want to mitigate their risk. And so in their mind, if they feel familiar with that person, that person is less risky for them, and therefore their investment in their mind may be safer. And so you need to establish that rapport and that level of comfort. And so as a woman, she was able to realize that and move forward because of it.
Well, I notice even today, sometimes I'll go into an event, and if I don't see anyone I recognize, I will kind of stand around. I'll go, munch on the food or whatever. But I'm wondering, this is, I suppose, part of preparation to succeed, is you want to be thinking about, what am I going to talk to people when I get there? I don't know if you tend to study March Madness brackets before you go into large gatherings, or maybe it's particular areas people are interested in. But this is I think, an important lesson.
Mm-hmm. Right, you have to definitely stay relevant with your clients, and I think, so much of being able to connect to people is something my industry is also very focused on, right? Having more female advisors, so when a very successful female entrepreneur is looking for advice, having someone they can relate to as well. So we think a lot about this, and we have to be relevant to our male and female clients in our industry.
And so you tend to tell the stories about your rare failures when to warm up the room. But are there other? I don't know if there are other techniques, maybe in sort of one-on-one meetings or larger gatherings where you. Well, let's face it, you need to sell yourself in a lot of these situations, and I think that's what, as parents, we try and tell kids, not to be braggarts, but you do need to promote yourself.
I'm very bad in big crowds. I tend to be, I get very, very fidgety, and I don't know what to say. I'm much better in smaller crowds. But it's like Rebecca and Veronica are saying, it's overcoming those things that I have most trouble with, and it's actually psyching myself up, where I'm going to go in, I'm going to shake some people's hands, and I'm going to ask them questions, and I'm not going to be so awkward, because I'm not naturally comfortable in those settings, and I avoid them as much as possible. But I know, from the standpoint of being an entrepreneur, I have to keep telling my story, and I have to keep, because it's all about the story. And in order for me to keep telling the story, I have to get over those fears. I think overcoming fear is a major thing, because I think a lot of people don't want to admit that they have certain fears, whether it's a fear of public speaking and a fear of rejection, which a fear of rejection is probably the greatest fear that we could have as people. Mm-hmm. So when you get over that, it's very hard to go through life and be desperately afraid of rejection. I've known a lot of people that, they want to do something, but the minute somebody tells them they can't do it, they shrink and they don't step out, and that's a tough place to be. It's
sad, though, because if you shrink and you don't step out, you already failed. You can never achieve what you want to achieve if you don't try.
That's the Wayne Gretzky's dad said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly.
I know that's not really exactly right, because of course you haven't taken the shot. Anyway, here's what I'm wondering. We've given people, I think, a nice roadmap to have a successful life. So it's all worked out. They got a good education. They worked hard. They didn't let obstacles stand in their way, and now they've actually made it. And this issue of holding on to it, maintaining wealth, Rebecca, because we were talking about Angie's strategy of keeping costs down, not spending too much. Mm-hmm. This is probably something that people later in life need to keep in mind too. We're living longer. Right. I don't know if you sort of advise people, stick with the office coffee instead of Starbucks, or not to knock Starbucks, but I'm wondering, is there a basic kind of advice you try to give people about, here's how not to do anything stupid once you've made it?
Oh, that's a good question. Of course, we don't want our clients to outlive their wealth, right? That's priority number one. So that sort of goes without saying. But we do, even for clients later in life who have been very successful, you still talk about some of these basic terms around budgeting and expenses, and then trying to think more long term, because most of them have worked really hard for their wealth, and they just assume their children will benefit from that, and their grandchildren will. And we know statistically, 70% of the wealth doesn't pass to second, and 90% doesn't pass to third generations, right? Mm. So it's just trying to let them keep a long-term view, reminding them, why their money matters and what are their values around it. And of course, we want them to enjoy some of their wealth. They did work hard.
I'm wondering, is it an issue balance, like where if they're people who have worked hard and been frugal and they've gotten to a certain point, is it just habits, or is it frequently an issue where you have to say, slow down, you're spending too much?
There are times for even very wealthy clients that you do have to say slow down, or they want to help everyone, right? They want to pay for college for all of their children and their grandchildren. And on paper, it looks like maybe they could do that. But again, then there's this risk that they may give it all away while in their lifetime, which if that's not their goal, then that can work against them. So we do still have to work very closely with our clients, even after they've had their big paydays and are really, trying to enjoy their wealth.
Okay, and Jeff, I don't know, you're paying college for everyone in the neighborhood, or just your kids?
Well, just my kids, and it's funny because they've changed majors and they've gone through this whole process. But the reality, and just to address what Rebecca said, it's the ability to delay gratification is a very, very necessary behavior.
We should have said that explicitly earlier. Exactly.
Yeah, because if you can't delay gratification, everything you want, you're going to spend money on it. You're not going to be able to wait for your investments. It used to drive me crazy when people would call and say, well, how come I haven't doubled my money yet? How come I don't own, how come I'm not outperforming? It's all about waiting and delaying gratification and having patience. And when you learn those behaviors, you could accomplish great things as an investor, as an entrepreneur, because life is not like TV, where everything gets resolved overnight and you become rich and famous. A lot of people want to be rich and famous, but to hold on to it is a whole other art. It's an art. You have to have someone like Rebecca in your corner. You have to read. You have to spend a lot of time understanding that to hold it. I've seen a lot of people that had a lot and lost it. And exorbitant amounts of money, and what it comes down to is it's not thinking through decisions and being unwilling to delay gratification. Those have been the main mistakes.
Okay, since this is TV, we need to resolve this segment. But great book. It's called Resilience, and it's available to Wall Street Journal subscribers.
That's right.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you, and thanks to you for watching. Please come back every weekday at noon Eastern for Deep Dive on Fox Nation. Thanks.